You notice it first in the quality of silence, not the absence of sound. The internet has never been louder, but a specific type of silence underneath the noise. The silence of a house where all the furniture remains, but the family has moved out. You scroll and scroll and scroll, and somewhere around the 15th swipe, you realize you haven't encountered a single human fingerprint. No typo that suggests hurried passion. No weird comma that betrays a non-native speaker thinking in their first language. No sudden tonal shift that marks where someone got angry, or drunk, or heartbroken halfway through writing. Just smoothness, efficiency, a kind of glossy perfection that makes your teeth itch. This feeling has a name now, though it didn't until recently. We call it the dead internet theory, but that title does it a disservice, makes it sound like a conspiracy, something believed by people who also think birds are surveillance drones. The truth is more banal and more disturbing. The internet isn't dead in the way a body is dead. It's dead in the way a forest is dead after it's been replaced by a Christmas tree farm. The shape remains, the green persists, but the ecology, the weird interconnected mess of life, has been clear-cut and replaced with rows of identical products. You are not paranoid for noticing this. You are observant. Let me describe the feeling more precisely, because precision is how we escape gaslighting, including the gaslighting we perform on ourselves. It is 2 a.m. on a Thursday. You cannot sleep, so you open your phone with the ritualistic resignation of a smoker reaching for a cigarette they don't even want. You begin on Twitter or X, or whatever we're calling the platform this year. The feed is a river of content, not a stream. Rivers suggest naturalness. This is an industrial channel, concrete-lined and fast-moving. You see a motivational quote superimposed over a sunset. You see an infographic about productivity. You see a thread that begins, "Here are 7 signs you're more intelligent than you think." You see a video of a recipe you will never make. You see an argument about a movie you haven't seen between people who seem to hate each other, but also seem to have identical syntax. You see a news headline that makes you angry, followed immediately by a different headline that makes you feel the anger was misplaced, followed immediately by an advertisement for therapy that seems to know you were just feeling angry. And somewhere in the friction between swipes, you realize, I cannot remember the last time I read something that felt written, not typed, not generated, not optimized. Written. Writing has texture. It has rhythm. It has the faint tang of a specific human nervous system trying to wrestle meaning from the void. Writing says things like, the faint tang of a specific human nervous system, because the writer couldn't think of the correct word, and so built a small tower of approximations, hoping you'd meet them halfway. A bot would say, the unique quality of individual human thought. Correct. Colorless. Dead. This is the haunting. Not that machines are talking. Machines have been talking since Eliza in 1966, and we made peace with that decades ago. The haunting is that machines are now talking exactly like humans who have been trained to talk like machines. Do you see the trap? The call was coming from inside the house the whole time. Somewhere in the last 15 years, we outsourced our writing to an audience we could not see could not hear, could not touch. We wrote for the algorithm. We wrote for SEO. We wrote for engagement metrics that treated a hate click and a love click as fungible. We wrote listicles because listicles performed well. We wrote threads because threads got retweeted. We wrote hot takes because lukewarm takes didn't get quote tweeted. And if you weren't getting quote tweeted, did you even exist? And then one day, no specific day, no clear boundary, large language models arrived and looked at the internet we had made and said, "Oh, I can do this." And they could, perfectly, because we had already made ourselves perfectly imitable. The dead internet theory, in its most literal form, suggests that the majority of internet content is now generated by bots, amplified by bots, and consumed by bots, with human beings relegated to the edges, an increasingly irrelevant minority in a space we built. The theory proposes that this shift happened silently, sometime around 2016 or 2017, and that most of what you encounter online is synthetic. Is this true? In the strictly empirical sense, no, probably not. Studies suggest humans still generate the majority of content, though the percentage is shrinking faster than rainforest acreage. But here is what the debunkers miss. Truth is not the same as accuracy. The feeling of the dead internet is true, even if the statistics are not, because the feeling responds to something real, the flattening of human variability into profitable templates. You do not need a majority of bots to kill the spirit of a place. You only need enough bots to shift the median. Once the median shifts, humans begin imitating what gets rewarded. The loop closes. The mirrors face each other. Let me give you a specific example, because the abstract makes cowards of us all. In 2008, food blogs were bizarre little kingdoms. Someone's grandmother would post a recipe for Croatian nut rolls, and the recipe would be embedded in 3,000 words about her childhood, her divorce, her garden, her neighbor's dog. The post would be titled something like Autumn Thoughts and Nut Rolls. There would be 12 photos, all slightly out of focus, taken with a digital camera that cost $89. The comment section would have 4 comments, 3 from friends, and 1 from a stranger in Perth who had Croatian grandparents and was crying. It was inefficient. It was perfect. By 2015, food blogs had professionalized. Every post now began with the phrase, "This is the best recipe for," followed by a keyword. The story about childhood was still there, but now it was preceded by an apology. "I know you just want the recipe, but Google makes me do this." The photos were sharp, well lit, taken from the same overhead angle. The comment sections had 400 comments, 380 of which were some variation of, "Can I substitute X for Y?" The blogger would answer each one because answering increased dwell time. By 2023, food blogs were content farms. You search for Croatian nut rolls, and the top result is from a site called something like All Recipes Daily or Food Mom Hub. The post begins with 8 paragraphs of auto-generated filler. Croatian nut rolls are a delightful pastry that originates from Croatia, a beautiful country located in Southeast Europe. These delicious treats are perfect for holidays, gatherings, or any time you want to impress your guests with authentic European baking. You scroll past this static, hunting for the actual recipe. You pass 3 ads, You pass a newsletter sign up. You pass a video that autoplays. You finally reach the recipe. It is in a special widget now, designed to prevent you from leaving. There are 4,000 comments, but they are all bots or SEO spam. Great recipe! Check out my blog for more ideas, with a link to a site selling knockoff sunglasses. The Croatian grandmother is gone. Her daughter, who briefly continued the blog, is gone. What remains is an optimized shell, a recipe that has been A/B tested, click-through rate maximized, and demographically targeted. It is not wrong. The nut rolls will probably taste fine. But something has been lost that we don't have a word for. Not information. The information is more accessible than ever. Not community. The comment count is higher than ever. What's been lost is presence, the feeling that a specific, limited mortal consciousness is trying to reach you across the void. Algorithms do not have presence, they have output. We are now so starved for presence that we will hallucinate it into anything that approximates the pattern. This is why you feel a pang of warmth when a brand's Twitter account makes a self-deprecating joke. This is why you sometimes read a YouTube comment and think, finally, a real person, only to look at the account and realize it's 3 days old with no other activity. We are like children growing up in a house where the parents have been replaced by incredibly sophisticated animatronics. The robots make breakfast. They ask about your day. They tuck you in at night. And because you have no memory of what real parents felt like, you think this is love. But your body knows. Somewhere deep in the brainstem, in the parts of you that evolved to detect the micro-expressions of a human face, the hesitations that signal honesty, the rhythms of breath that indicate shared mortality, that part of you knows, and it is screaming. The internet was supposed to be a place, not a tool, not a utility, but an actual place where people gathered. In the early and mid-2000s, this was still true. You had forums where the same 30 people showed up every day for years. You had live journal communities where people wrote 5,000-word posts about their favorite fictional characters, and other people, real people with screen names you came to recognize, would write 5,000-word responses. You had webcomics that updated on Tuesdays, and everyone knew it updated on Tuesdays, and there was something sacred about that consistency. These places were not better because they were smaller. They were better because they were bounded. You knew who was there. You developed relationships. You had inside jokes that would make no sense to outsiders. You had drama, real, stupid, human drama about who said what, in which thread. And when someone left, you noticed. You wondered where they went. Sometimes you worried. You cannot worry about a number. You cannot mourn a metric. And the modern internet is nothing but numbers and metrics. The shift happened gradually, then suddenly, the way hemlock poisoning works, the way a marriage ends. Platforms became feeds. Feeds became infinite. Infinity became scroll. Scroll became the primary action, not reading, not connecting, not creating, just scroll. The muscle memory of the thumb against glass, the micro hits of novelty, each one slightly less satisfying than the last, but the friction of stopping now higher than the friction of continuing. And in this new architecture, presence became inefficient. Because here's the economics. Presence requires time. It requires the willingness to be bored, to meander, to let someone tell you about their grandmother before they tell you the recipe. But platforms are not paid for time well spent. They are paid for time spent. The difference is everything. Time well spent might mean you visit once a day, read something that changes you, and leave satisfied. Time spent means you are trapped in an infinite loop, rage clicking, hate reading, doom scrolling, each interaction firing off little data points that get fed into a model that learns exactly how to keep you there for one more minute, one more ad impression, one more fraction of a cent. Presence is bad for business. Presence makes you stop scrolling, so it had to die. Every content creator who ever wrote a headline they hated because the original headline didn't perform well in testing, they were not part of a conspiracy. They were making rent. Every platform engineer who ever designed an interface to maximize engagement rather than satisfaction, they were not evil. They were solving the problem they were hired to solve. What if we could remove the friction? What if we could create a system that never got tired, never got bored, never had a crisis of meaning, and deleted their account? We did. We called it content. And content has no presence, only volume. You are not imagining this. The house is haunted. But the ghost is not some external demon. The ghost is us, or rather, the idea of us, the averaged out, focus grouped, A/B tested shadow of what we were before we learned to perform ourselves for an audience of algorithms. And the question we now face, the question that will determine what the next decade of human consciousness looks like, is this: can you recognize a ghost if it's wearing your own face? The feeling is not new, only the speed is new. If you were alive in 1995 and someone told you the internet would one day feel hollow, you would have thought they were insane. The internet in 1995 was a carnival of human weirdness, personal websites with rotating skull GIFs, guest books where strangers left messages, web rings that connected people by interest rather than geography. It was ugly and slow and magical in the way that anything genuinely human is magical, unpredictable, inefficient, and shot through with longing. But here's what we forget. People in 1995 were saying the exact same thing about television. They mourned the death of radio. They spoke wistfully of the 1930s and 1940s, when families gathered around a wooden box in the living room and listened to voices from across the country tell them stories. Radio had presence. You could hear the crackle of the transmission, the regional accent of the announcer, the sound of a script being shuffled. When Orson Welles broadcast The War of the Worlds in 1938 and caused a minor panic, it was because people believed a human voice, in real time, could reach through the static and tell you the truth. Television killed that. Not immediately. Nothing dies immediately, but slowly, the way a tree dies from the inside out. By the 1960s, radio had become a background medium. Music and traffic reports. The human voice was still there, but it was no longer the primary carrier of narrative, of culture, of presence. Television had won because television offered something radio could not: the face, the body, the illusion of physical co-presence. And for 30 years, television was king. Families gathered around a different box, this one with a screen, and watched the same 3 channels at the same time. There was a shared culture. You could reference a TV show at work, and everyone would know what you meant. The evening news was a ritual. Johnny Carson was a national bedtime story. But people in the 1980s were already mourning. They spoke wistfully of the 1950s, when neighborhoods had front porches and people talked to each other instead of staring at screens. They worried about children who grew up with television as a babysitter. They wrote op-eds about the death of conversation, the collapse of attention spans, the replacement of human connection with mediated experience. They were right, and they were wrong. They were right that something had been lost. The specific texture of pre-television social life, the necessity of face-to-face interaction, the boredom that forced creativity, the lack of constant stimulation, was gone and would never return. But they were wrong to think this was the first time, because people in the 1950s had mourned the death of letter writing, killed by the telephone, and people in the 1920s had mourned the death of oral culture, killed by mass literacy and the printing press. Every communication technology follows the same arc: birth, adoption, saturation, optimization, death. The death is not always literal. Television still exists. Radio still exists. But they exist as diminished things, stripped of their cultural centrality, relegated to niches. The internet is not gone, but the internet as a place, as a site of human congregation and meaning-making, is dying in real time, and we are the first generation to watch it happen with full self-awareness. This is the curse of living in the hinge of history. We remember what was, we can see what is coming, and we are paralyzed between nostalgia and dread. Let me take you back further, because the only way to understand the present is to see it as one frame in a much longer film. In the late 1400s, the printing press arrived in Europe and destroyed the world. Not physically, though it would eventually contribute to wars, but cognitively. For 1,000 years, knowledge had been controlled by a small literate elite. Monks copied manuscripts by hand. Books were rare and expensive. Most people never read a book in their entire lives. Culture was oral. Stories were told, not written. Memory was communal. The printing press changed this with horrifying speed. Within 50 years, millions of books were in circulation. The price of information collapsed. Suddenly, any person with a few coins could own a Bible, a manual, a collection of poems. The Catholic Church lost its monopoly on scriptural interpretation. Martin Luther nailed his theses to a door, but it was the printing press that nailed them to every door in Europe. This was a good thing, we are taught. The Reformation, the Enlightenment, the spread of literacy, progress. But if you were alive in 1500, it did not feel like progress. It felt like the end of the world. Regional dialects began to die as standardized languages emerged. Oral poets, people who could recite the Iliad from memory, became obsolete. The tight-knit communities that had relied on shared stories and collective memory began to fracture. People could now read in private, which meant they could think in private, which meant they could disagree in private, which meant the old mechanisms of social control, shame, reputation, the fear of being cast out, began to fail. The printing press did not make people smarter. It made them different. It rewired cognition itself. Memory became externalized. Argumentation became linear. The novel emerged as a form, and with it, the modern concept of the individual self, the interior life, the private consciousness that existed apart from the tribe. Was this worth it? The question is meaningless. It happened. You cannot ask a river if it regrets flowing downhill. But here is what matters. The people who lived through it felt the loss. They mourned the death of oral culture, even as they eagerly consumed the new printed books. They sensed that something irreplaceable was being traded for something novel and powerful, but also cold, impersonal, mechanized. Sound familiar? Every communication revolution follows this pattern, because every communication revolution is a renegotiation of how human consciousness is distributed in space and time. Oral culture keeps consciousness local and immediate. You can only talk to people who are physically present, and stories only survive if they are remembered and retold. This creates tight social bonds, but limits scale. Writing extends consciousness across time. You can speak to someone 100 years in the future, but you lose the warmth of the voice, the ability to adjust your message to the listener's reaction in real time. Print extends consciousness across space. Anyone, anywhere, can read the same text, but you lose the bespoke quality of handwritten letters, the sense that this message was made specifically for you. Broadcast media, radio, television extend consciousness across both space and time, but introduce a new asymmetry. One speaker, millions of listeners. You gain reach. You lose conversation. The internet, in its first incarnation, promised to solve this. It would combine the reach of broadcast media with the interactivity of conversation. Everyone could be both speaker and listener. The masses would finally have a voice. And for about 15 years, from roughly 1995 to 2010, this was true. Forums, blogs, early social media, they were chaotic and human and weird. You could post something and have a conversation with a stranger in Germany. You could build a following of 20 people who genuinely cared about your thoughts on Byzantine architecture. The internet was a genuine third place, a commons, a town square that never closed. But then came the optimization. Here's the thing about every communication technology. It starts as a tool for humans and ends as a tool for profit. The printing press began as a way to spread knowledge. Within a century, it was primarily a way to sell pamphlets, almanacs, and propaganda. Radio began as a hobbyist experiment. Within 20 years, it was a commercial enterprise selling soap and cigarettes. Television began as a public good. Within a decade, it was an advertising delivery mechanism that occasionally showed content. The internet followed the same path, but faster. So much faster. In 2004, Facebook launched. In 2005, YouTube. In 2006, Twitter. These platforms were initially tools, ways to connect, to share, to create. But by 2010, they had become something else. behavioral modification engines designed to maximize a single variable called engagement. Engagement is a deceptive word. It sounds positive, active, human. But in the context of digital platforms, engagement simply means time spent and actions taken. It does not measure satisfaction. It does not measure growth. It does not measure whether the experience made you more human or less. It measures whether you clicked, scrolled, tapped, watched, and most importantly, whether you came back. And here is where the archaeology gets dark, because we can now see the bones beneath the skin. In 2009, a platform had a choice: design for user satisfaction or design for engagement. These were not the same thing. User satisfaction might mean someone visits your site once a day, spends 20 focused minutes, learns something or connects with someone, and leaves feeling fulfilled. Engagement meant someone visits your site 10 times a day, spends 3 hours in total, most of it mindlessly scrolling, and leaves feeling vaguely anxious and guilty, but unable to stop. Which do you think won? The answer was determined not by malice, but by math. Platforms are funded by advertising. Advertising is priced by attention. Attention is measured by time on site and actions per session. A satisfied user who visits once and leaves is worth 1 ad impression. An engaged user who cannot leave is worth 50. This is not a conspiracy. This is an economic structure, selecting for a specific outcome the way natural selection selects for traits. The platforms that maximized engagement survived. The platforms that prioritized user well-being died. And so, in the span of about 5 years, 2010 to 2015, the internet underwent a phase change. It stopped being a place and became a system optimized not for human flourishing, but for advertising revenue. The effects were immediate and structural. Chronological feeds were replaced by algorithmic feeds. The algorithm did not show you what was new. It showed you what would keep you scrolling. Long-form blogs died because they were hard to monetize. Short-form social media exploded because it was easy to monetize. Quiet corners of the internet, niche forums, personal websites began to empty out as people migrated to the platforms, because that's where the audience was, and if you wanted to be heard, you had to go where the ears were. But the ears were not human ears anymore. They were algorithmic attention filters, and they only listened for specific frequencies: outrage, titillation, fear, tribalism, and novelty. Anything else was signal loss. Writers noticed this first. By 2012, every online publication had an editor whose job was to write headlines that would perform well on Facebook. Not headlines that accurately reflected the article. Not headlines that respected the reader's intelligence. Headlines that would generate clicks. The art of the headline became the science of the clickbait. And writers, being adaptable creatures, began to internalize the algorithm. You didn't need an editor to tell you anymore. You knew. You could feel it. This headline would get 500 shares. This one would get 50. And slowly, imperceptibly, you stopped writing the thing you wanted to write and started writing the thing that would perform. This is the moment. This is where the internet began to die. Not when the bots arrived, not when GPT-3 launched, But when humans began voluntarily amputating the parts of themselves that the algorithm did not reward. By 2015, the internet was a very different place than it had been in 2005. It was faster, sleeker, more professional, but it was also flatter. The weird personal blogs were gone. The long, meandering forum threads were gone. The homebrew websites with their clunky HTML and passion projects, gone. What remained was platform-native content, tweets, posts, videos, designed to be consumed in under 60 seconds. Think pieces that were really just hot takes, stretched to 800 words. And the people who remembered the old internet, the ones who had spent their adolescence on LiveJournal or their 20s on obscure forums, began to feel a specific kind of grief. Not the grief of loss, exactly, but the grief of watching something you love be hollowed out and worn as a costume by something that does not understand it. This grief has a name in other contexts. When a neighborhood gentrifies, the longtime residents feel it. When a subculture goes mainstream, the early adopters feel it. When a language dies and is replaced by a Creole, the native speakers feel it. It is the grief of obsolescence. Not your own obsolescence. You're still here, still breathing, still online. But the obsolescence of your way of being, the recognition that the thing you loved is no longer legible to the world that replaced it. And here is the archaeological insight. This has happened before, many times. The people who loved radio mourned when television arrived. The people who loved television mourned when the internet arrived. And now the people who loved the internet are mourning as the internet is replaced by... what? Not a new technology. The internet is still the internet. The infrastructure is the same. But the culture, the way humans relate to each other through the technology, has died and been replaced by something that looks like culture, but is actually a simulation of culture, optimized for profit. This is why the dead internet theory resonates so powerfully. It is not really about bots. It is about the recognition that the internet is no longer a human place. It is a space where human behavior has been so thoroughly predicted, measured, and monetized that the humans themselves have become redundant. The bots are not replacing us. We have already replaced ourselves. And the worst part? We did it willingly, eagerly even, because the algorithm rewarded us. It gave us likes, followers, reach. It made us feel seen, and we were so hungry to be seen that we didn't notice we were being turned into content, into data, into models that could be replicated by a machine. The printing press killed oral culture in 150 years. Television killed radio culture in 30 years. The internet killed its own culture in 15 years. The question is not whether we can bring it back. The archaeologist does not weep over ruins. They study them. The question is, what comes next? And will there be anything left of us to see it? We need to talk about the moment the numbers became God. Not metaphorically, not as hyperbole. I mean the actual transfer of power from human judgment to algorithmic measurement. The quiet coup that happened in conference rooms and product meetings between 2008 and 2014, when a specific philosophy of optimization became the unquestioned orthodoxy of the internet. If you want to pinpoint when the internet died, forget 2016. Forget the bots, the AI, the election interference. Those were symptoms. The disease was earlier. The disease was the moment someone at a tech company said, "We should A/B test this," and everyone in the room nodded, and no one asked what would be lost in the testing. A/B testing sounds innocuous, scientific even. You create two versions of something, a button color, a headline, a layout, and show each version to a random subset of users. You measure which version produces more clicks, more time on site, more conversions. You keep the winner. You iterate. Over time, through thousands of tiny improvements, you approach perfection. Except you don't approach perfection. You approach local maxima. You optimize for the thing you measured, which is never the thing that actually matters. Let me give you the exact moment I realized this. It was 2011. I was reading a design blog, one of the good ones, written by someone who actually cared about craft, and the author was mourning the death of a particular website's redesign. The site had been beautiful, idiosyncratic, a little difficult to navigate, but rewarding once you learned it. Then it got A/B tested. The new version was cleaner, faster, more intuitive, and completely soulless. Every element that didn't directly contribute to user engagement had been removed. The little illustrations in the margins, gone. They increased page load time. The meandering about page that told the story of how the site was founded, gone. Users didn't read it. The weird categorical organization that reflected the founder's particular obsession, gone. Replaced by a standard navigation menu optimized for clicks. The site now converted visitors to subscribers at a 23% higher rate. It also converted a place into a funnel. And here's the thing, no one made this decision consciously. No one sat in a room and said, "Let's kill the soul of this website." They just ran the tests. They followed the data. And the data said clearly and unambiguously that users preferred the soulless version. Did they, though? This is where we need to talk about Goodhart's Law, because it is the epitaph that should be carved on the internet's tombstone. Goodhart's Law, formulated by British economist Charles Goodhart in 1975, states, "When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure." In other words, the moment you start optimizing for a metric, that metric becomes corrupted, because it is now measuring not the underlying reality, but the optimization process itself. Example, you want to measure teacher quality, so you test student performance. Reasonable. But the moment teacher salaries are tied to test scores, teachers stop teaching and start teaching to the test. The metric, test scores, is now measuring not educational quality, but test preparation skill. The original goal has been destroyed by the process of measuring it. Now apply this to the internet. In 2006, platforms wanted to measure user satisfaction. Hard to measure directly, so they used a proxy: engagement, time on site, number of interactions, return visits. These seemed like reasonable proxies. If people spent time on your platform and came back, they must be satisfied, right? Wrong. Because the moment engagement became the target, platforms stopped optimizing for satisfaction and started optimizing for compulsion. They discovered that anger drives engagement better than joy, that anxiety drives engagement better than contentment, that FOMO, fear of missing out, drives engagement better than fulfillment. They discovered, in short, that the human psychological vulnerabilities that evolution gave us for survival in small tribes could be exploited to keep us scrolling long past the point of enjoyment. And because they were optimizing for a metric, not for the underlying human experience, they had no feedback mechanism to tell them they were destroying the thing they claimed to be building. The statisticians had won, but what they won was Pyrrhic. Let me take you inside the mind of the optimization machine, because most people have never seen how this works in practice. You are a product manager at a social media company in 2012. Your job is to increase user engagement. You have a team of engineers, a team of designers, and a team of data scientists. Every week, you run experiments, dozens of them, hundreds, if you're at a big company. Each experiment is small. Maybe you change the color of the notification dot from red to orange. Maybe you change the algorithm to show users more content from people they disagree with, because disagreement drives comments. Maybe you add a tiny amount of artificial delay before showing a user their like count, because the anticipation triggers a dopamine response. Each experiment is tested rigorously. You have control groups, statistical significance, confidence intervals. You are doing science, and each experiment works. The orange notification dot increases click-through rate by 2.3%. The disagreement content increases comment rate by 8.7%. The artificial delay increases return visit rate by 4.1%. You ship all three. Your quarterly report shows a 15.1% increase in engagement. You get promoted. You never ask whether users are happier. That's not measurable. You never ask whether the platform is making people's lives better. That's not your metric. You never ask whether you're building something you'd want your own children to use. That's not your job. Your job is to increase engagement. And engagement is increasing. Therefore, you are succeeding. This is not hypothetical. This is exactly how it worked. I know because I've spoken to people who were in these rooms, who ran these experiments, who got these promotions. And to a person, they will tell you, we knew. Not explicitly, not consciously, but we knew. We knew because we would ship a feature that increased engagement, and then we would go home and turn off our own notifications. We knew because we would optimize the news feed algorithm to show more outrage-inducing content, and then we would stop checking our feeds before bed because they made us anxious. We knew because we built features specifically designed to be addictive, and then we would joke darkly about needing to delete the app to get any work done. We knew we were building something monstrous, but the metrics said it was good, and we had all been trained to trust the metrics. This is the statisticians' coup, the replacement of human judgment with quantified measurement, the elevation of data over wisdom, the belief that if something cannot be measured, it does not matter. And the internet was the perfect victim because the internet, unlike the physical world, is completely measurable. Every click, every scroll, every millisecond of hesitation, all of it can be tracked, logged, analyzed. The internet is not a place, it is a data stream, and data streams can be optimized. By 2014, every major platform had fully committed to the optimization paradigm. Facebook had killed its chronological feed in favor of the algorithmic news feed. Twitter had introduced algorithmic timeline ranking. YouTube had replaced its subscription feed with a recommendations engine. Google had updated its search algorithm dozens of times to prioritize engagement metrics over relevance. And content creators, the humans who actually made the internet interesting, noticed. They noticed that their posts reached fewer people unless they used specific keywords. They noticed that their videos got promoted more if they used clickbait thumbnails. They noticed that their articles got more traffic if they used emotional language in the headlines. So they adapted, because the alternative was irrelevance. This is where the feedback loop became a death spiral. Platforms optimized for engagement. Engagement rewarded specific types of content. Creators made more of that content. The algorithm learned that this was what users wanted. Users saw more of this content. Some users hated it and left. The users who remained were, by definition, the users who liked this type of content, or at least tolerated it. The algorithm learned from these remaining users. The content became more extreme. The cycle continued. This process has a name in evolutionary biology: artificial selection. Except instead of breeding dogs or crops, we were breeding content. And just like dog breeding produces creatures that can barely breathe, content breeding produced media that was optimized for clicks, but toxic to the human mind. By 2015, the Curiosity Gap headline had been so overused, it stopped working. You won't believe what happens next. This one weird trick. Users developed immunity. The format died. But here's what matters. In the 2 years the Curiosity Gap ruled the internet, it changed the way an entire generation thought about headlines. It taught writers that information should be withheld. It taught readers that content was probably not worth the click. It degraded trust. It made the internet a little more hostile, a little more adversarial, and then it died. And we moved on to the next exploitation. This is the pattern. This is the mechanism of death. The internet doesn't die all at once. It dies in tiny increments, one optimization at a time. Each optimization makes sense in isolation. Each one increases the target metric. But the cumulative effect is the slow replacement of human culture with algorithmic culture. A culture that has no values except efficiency, no aesthetic except what tests well, no purpose except growth. Let me tell you what happens when you optimize everything. You lose serendipity, because serendipity is inefficient. If an algorithm knows what you like, why would it show you something different? You lose depth, because depth requires sustained attention, and sustained attention is less engaging than the dopamine hits of novelty. You lose weirdness, because weirdness is unpredictable, and unpredictable content might drive some users away, and it's better to keep everyone mildly engaged than to give some users something they love and others something they hate. You lose vulnerability, because vulnerability requires trust, and trust requires stability, and stability is impossible when every element of the interface might change based on an A/B test tomorrow. You lose humanity. Not because algorithms are inhuman, but because algorithms reward the most mechanical aspects of human behavior and punish everything else. By 2016, the internet had become a vast machine for converting human attention into advertising revenue. Every platform was essentially the same. a feed of content selected by an algorithm to maximize time on site. The content was technically created by humans, but it was created by humans who had been trained to think like algorithms, to write for algorithms, to optimize their own output for algorithmic approval. We had become cyborgs, not in the cool sci-fi way, in the sad, diminished way. We had outsourced our judgment to machines and our creativity to metrics. And then, because God has a sense of irony, the machines learned to skip the middleman. GPT-3 launched in 2020. By 2022, it could write better SEO content than most humans, better clickbait headlines, better product descriptions, better everything that had been optimized to the point of soullessness. This should have been a wake-up call. It should have made us realize that if a machine can do it, it was never human to begin with. Instead, we panicked because we had spent 15 years training ourselves to be replaceable, and we had succeeded. The statisticians' coup was complete. They had not just measured human behavior, they had shaped it. They had created a world where the measurable was valuable and the unmeasurable was worthless. They had built a system that rewarded mimicry and punished originality, that elevated the average and eliminated the outliers, that turned culture into content and people into users. And now that world was eating itself. Because here's the final twist, the one that should terrify anyone who understands feedback loops. The algorithms are now training on content that was created for algorithms. GPT-4 was trained partially on the internet of 2021, an internet that had already been optimized to death. The next generation of models will be trained on an internet that includes GPT-4's output. We are watching the formation of a closed loop. Algorithms optimizing humans, optimizing for algorithms, optimizing on data from optimized humans. The statisticians won, but what they won was a wasteland. There's a concept in ecology called trophic cascade. When you remove a keystone species from an ecosystem, wolves from a forest, sea otters from a kelp forest, the entire system collapses in unexpected ways. The deer overpopulate, the trees die, the rivers change course. The internet had keystone species too. The weird bloggers, the forum moderators, the people who made things for love rather than metrics. The optimization removed them, not violently, just gradually, by making their work invisible, irrelevant, unrewarded. And the system collapsed, not into nothing, there's more content than ever, but into a strange desert of abundance where nothing is nourishing. The internet died because we chose to measure it, and once measured, it could be optimized, and once optimized, it ceased to be a place for humans and became a place for the thing humans could be reduced to, patterns in a data set. The question now is, can a pattern love? Can a pattern grieve? Can a pattern recognize itself in a mirror? Or is that the last part of humanity that cannot be optimized away? The machine did not invade. It was invited. This is the part that hurts most to admit. When GPT-3 launched in June 2020, there was no hostile takeover, no war between humans and machines. There was barely even resistance. The technology arrived, looked at what we had built, and said quietly, I can do this. And it could. Perfectly. Because by 2020, the optimization we traced in the previous chapters had made us perfectly imitable. Think about what we had done to ourselves. By 2020, if you wanted to write a successful blog post, you followed a template: catchy headline with numbers or power words, introduction with a hook, subheadings every 300 words, bullet points for scannability, conclusion with a call to action, 1,500 to 2,000 words for SEO. Every content marketing guide said the same thing. Every successful blog followed the same structure. A human following this template and an AI following this template are functionally indistinguishable. Or consider social media. By 2020, successful Twitter threads had a formula: provocative opening statement, numbered list of supporting points, strategic line breaks for emphasis, ending with a call to action or a request to share. The most viral threads were not the most insightful. They were the most algorithmically legible. A human who had internalized these rules and an AI that had been trained on the output are producing the same thing. This is the horror. GPT didn't replace us. It revealed that we had already replaced ourselves. The original dead internet theory, as formulated on anonymous message boards around 2021, suggested that the majority of internet traffic was already bots. Most debunkings focus on traffic analysis. Humans still generate most original content. Most accounts are real people. But these debunkings miss the point entirely. The dead internet theory is not a claim about traffic statistics. It's a phenomenological observation. The internet feels dead because the distinction between human and bot has collapsed from the inside. This collapse has a name in philosophy: mimetic collapse. It was coined by media theorist Geert Levink in 2019, before GPT-3, but it perfectly describes what happened next. Mimetic collapse occurs when the distinction between original and copy becomes meaningless, because the originals were already copies of something else. GPT-3 didn't kill originality in writing. It made visible the fact that most internet writing had already become mass-produced, template-driven, algorithmically optimized to the point of interchangeability. And once GPT-3 existed, it created a new economic reality. Why pay a human to write generic content when a machine can do it faster, cheaper, and more consistently? In 2022, content mills, websites that paid freelance writers pennies per word to churn out SEO articles, began quietly replacing their human writers with AI. Not all at once. Gradually. A writer would notice their assignments drying up. They'd ask why. The editor would say something vague about restructuring or changing priorities. The articles kept appearing, though. Same style, same topics, just faster and cheaper. By 2023, this was no longer quiet. Companies openly bragged about using AI for content creation. Marketing agencies sold it as a feature. We produce 10x more content at 1/10 the cost. No one asked whether anyone wanted 10x more content. The metric was production, not value. And readers? Readers didn't notice. Or they noticed and didn't care, because the content had never been that good to begin with. This is the great replacement. Not a dystopian future where robots take over, but a mundane present where the robots already have taken over the parts of human work that had become robotic. Customer service chatbots replaced customer service representatives who were reading from scripts. AI news aggregators replaced human news aggregators who were summarizing press releases. GPT-powered product descriptions replaced copywriters who were filling templates. Each replacement made economic sense. Each one slightly degraded the experience. Each one made the internet a little more hollow. But the real replacement, the one that should terrify us, is happening in ordinary, everyday communication. By late 2023, ChatGPT had been integrated into everything: word processors, email clients, social media management tools. People began using it casually, not to replace their writing entirely, but to polish it, to make it sound more professional, to find the right words. And here's the trap. When you ask an AI to make your writing better, what you're really asking is for it to make your writing more like the averaged output of all the writing it was trained on. You're asking it to sand down your idiosyncrasies, to remove your verbal tics, to make you sound like everyone else. You're asking it to optimize you. I started noticing this in late 2023. Emails from friends started to sound weirdly formal. Social media posts from people I knew well started using phrases they'd never used before. Not wrong phrases, just generic ones. I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to reach out. I appreciate your perspective. Nothing obviously AI generated, just flatter, less specific, less human. When I asked people about it, they were sometimes sheepish. Oh, I just ran it through ChatGPT to clean it up. They didn't think of it as outsourcing their voice. They thought of it as editing. But editing preserves voice. This was replacement. And the insidious part is that it worked. The AI polished messages got better responses. They were clearer, more professional, more likely to get what they wanted, because the AI had been trained on successful communication. And successful communication in an optimized internet means communication that follows the templates. So people kept using it, and with each use, their own voice atrophied a little more, because if the machine can say it better, or at least more efficiently, why struggle to find your own words? This is how replacement happens, not through force, but through convenience. What we lose, the awkwardness that signals vulnerability, the weird phrasing that reveals personality, the mistakes that show you cared enough to write it yourself, but were human enough to stumble. AI communication has no tells, no gaps, no friction, and friction is where meaning lives. Let me tell you about a specific moment when I realized how far this had gone. It was early 2024. I was reading a heartfelt post from someone about their grief, the death of a parent, raw and specific. The writing was beautiful, vulnerable, real, and in the comments, dozens of people offering condolences. But the condolences all sounded the same, not in the normal way where grief vocabulary is limited, in a new way, too polished, too perfectly structured. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Losing a parent is one of life's most difficult experiences. Please know that your feelings are valid, and it's okay to take all the time you need to grieve. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here for you. 20 variations of this, all correct, all compassionate, all completely devoid of the specific human awkwardness that makes grief condolences meaningful, the stammering, the not knowing what to say, the offering of a specific memory or a stupid joke, because grief makes us weird. I don't know if those comments were AI generated. That's the point. It doesn't matter. Whether written by GPT or by humans who had internalized GPT's style, the result is the same. The flattening of human expression into efficient, optimized, emotionally appropriate, but spiritually empty language. This is the great replacement. Not humans replaced by machines, but human variability replaced by machine consensus. But here's the question that haunts me. If we can't tell the difference between human and AI writing, does the difference matter? Most people would say yes, of course it matters. There's something sacred about human expression, something irreplaceable about the connection between one consciousness and another. But is there, really? If I read a poem and it moves me, and then I discover it was written by GPT-4, does it move me less? If I have a conversation with a chatbot and feel understood, is that understanding false? The philosophical term for this is the Chinese room problem, formulated by John Searle in 1980. Imagine a person in a room who doesn't speak Chinese, but has a book of rules for manipulating Chinese symbols. Someone slips a question in Chinese under the door. The person uses the rule book to construct a response in Chinese and slips it back. To the outside observer, the room appears to understand Chinese. But does it? Searle argued no. Syntax is not semantics. Following rules is not understanding. But here's what Searle missed. If the human on the outside cannot tell the difference, if the response is indistinguishable from understanding, then what exactly is being lost? The answer brings us to neurology, because the loss isn't philosophical, it's physiological, and your body has been trying to tell you about it for years. The great replacement is complete. We collaborated in our own obsolescence, but what we lost wasn't labor. It was the possibility of surprise, the chance that someone might say something no algorithm would generate, something true and strange and beautiful in its wrongness. We lost the last refuge of the human, the ability to fail interestingly, because AI never fails interestingly. It fails boringly, statistically, in ways that can be patched in the next update. But humans fail in ways that create jazz, abstract expressionism, punk rock, the internet itself. The great replacement worked because we had already optimized the interesting failures out of our systems. We had made ourselves safe, predictable, algorithmically legible, and in doing so, we had made ourselves replaceable. The question is not whether we can stop the replacement. It's already done. The question is, what do we do now? Your body knows before your mind does. You scroll through your feed and something feels wrong. Not dangerous wrong, not exciting wrong, just empty wrong, hollow wrong, the wrongness of biting into an apple and finding it's made of wax. And your body reacts, not with fear. Fear would be easier, but with something harder to name. A loneliness that doesn't make sense because you're surrounded by content, by interaction, by the constant presence of others. Except you're not, and some part of you has always known it. Let me tell you what happens in your brain when you encounter another human being. There is a network of regions that light up, a specific neural signature that researchers call the social brain, the temporoparietal junction, the superior temporal sulcus, the medial prefrontal cortex. These regions are not general-purpose processors. They evolved for one specific task: detecting and interpreting the presence of other minds. When you read something written by a human, actually written, not generated, these regions activate. They're trying to build a model of the mind on the other end. What does this person believe? What do they want? What are they trying to make me feel? This process is called theory of mind, and it's one of the things that makes us distinctly human. We are constantly, obsessively trying to read each other's minds. And here's the critical part. This process requires certain inputs, inconsistencies, hesitations, choices that reveal preference, the small imperfections that signal a specific intelligence making specific decisions under specific constraints. When these inputs are missing, when the text is too smooth, too consistent, too perfectly optimized, the social brain doesn't get what it needs. It tries to build a model of the mind on the other end and comes up with nothing, a blank, a null response. And this creates a specific type of cognitive dissonance. Your language processing centers say, this is communication. But your social processing centers say, there is no one there. The result is not fear. It's something worse, a kind of existential loneliness. The loneliness of speaking into a void that occasionally echoes back perfect, contentless responses. There's a word for this feeling: kenopsia, the eerie, forlorn atmosphere of a place that's usually bustling but is now abandoned. A shopping mall at 3 a.m., a school during summer. Kenopsia is the emotional weather of the dead internet, and your body registers it before you do. Heart rate variability decreases. Cortisol ticks up. The vagal brake, the system that keeps you calm and socially engaged, starts to disengage. These are the same physiological markers that appear during social isolation. Your body is responding to the internet the way it responds to being ignored. There's a phenomenon in psychology called the mere exposure effect, discovered by Robert Zajonc in 1968. The more you're exposed to something, a face, a name, a piece of music, the more you tend to like it. This is fundamental to social bonding. But researchers discovered something critical. The mere exposure effect only works when you believe you're encountering a genuine agent. If you know something is randomly generated or mechanical, the effect disappears. Your brain refuses to bond with it. Now apply this to the modern internet. You encounter the same types of posts over and over. Under normal circumstances, this repetition should create familiarity, but it doesn't. Because deep down, you've started to detect the pattern. You've realized these aren't variations by different humans. They're variations generated by the same underlying system. And your brain, which evolved to bond with other humans through repeated exposure, refuses to bond with a system. Instead of warm familiarity, you get the uncanny valley. This is why the dead internet is so disturbing. Machines are triggering our social circuitry without fulfilling its purpose. They give us all the patterns of human interaction without the actual presence of another mind. We are experiencing a new kind of hunger, social hunger, and we're being fed empty calories. During pandemic lockdowns, people reported feeling intensely lonely despite hours on video calls and social media. Longitudinal studies suggested causation. Using social media was making people lonelier. The standard explanation was comparison effects and FOMO. But I think the real explanation is simpler. By 2020, social media had already become dead internet. People were spending hours trying to connect with humans and mostly connecting with simulations. Their social brains were firing constantly. Someone is talking to me, but the reward never came, because connection requires reciprocity. It requires the feeling that your response matters to a specific consciousness that will be changed by receiving it. The algorithm doesn't change. It just feeds you the next piece of content. This is the neurological trap. The dead internet exploits our social wiring while providing none of the reward. It's the equivalent of giving a starving person pictures of food. This is not weakness. This is neurology. Your social brain has been activated by the suggestion of human presence, and now it's seeking the promised reward. But the reward isn't coming, so your brain does what it evolved to do when connection is scarce. It lowers its standards. Maybe the next post will be real. This is the same mechanism that keeps gamblers at slot machines. Intermittent reinforcement. The occasional real human post keeps you searching through the 99% that's hollow. And like gambling, this creates physiological changes. Your dopamine system becomes dysregulated. Your baseline for reward shifts. You need more stimulation to feel the same engagement. The real human posts that used to satisfy you now feel insufficient. This is why discourse has become so polarized, so performatively emotional. We're chasing genuine connection in a space increasingly devoid of it. So we perform more intensely, hoping that if we're emotional enough, we'll break through the noise. But the algorithm rewards emotional extremity. So the more we perform authentic emotion to find other humans, the more we're rewarded by the algorithm, which trains us to perform even more. Until we've become indistinguishable from bots, optimized for engagement. We're caught in a feedback loop where our search for authentic connection is making us less authentically human. The internet has universalized parasocial relationships. Everyone you follow, everyone whose content you consume, these are mostly one-sided now. You're responding to their posts, but they're not responding to you. They're responding to their metrics. Or they're not even a they. They're an aggregate of engagement-optimized content you've anthropomorphized into a personality. Parasocial relationships don't satisfy the need for connection. They simulate it. And like all simulations, they leave you hungrier. There's research from 2024 on this. Neuroscientists at Stanford scanned people's brains while they interacted with AI chatbots versus human interlocutors. Subjects knew which was which, and even with that knowledge, their brains showed different activation patterns. When talking to humans, the social brain lit up fully. Empathy, theory of mind, emotional resonance, all active. When talking to AI, these regions showed reduced activation. The language processing was the same, but the social processing was muted, like the brain was hedging. Subjects reported that AI conversations felt fine, but empty. They couldn't articulate why. The AI had been pleasant, understanding, responsive. But something was missing. What was missing was stakes. Human conversation has stakes because humans can be hurt, disappointed, rejected. Every interaction carries risk. When you tell a human something vulnerable and they respond with empathy, it matters because they could have chosen judgment. AI cannot choose empathy. It can only simulate it. This is why AI companions feel soothing but not satisfying. They give you surface connection without depth, interpersonal fast food. And just like fast food, they're slowly killing us. Not literally, but they're killing the part of us that knows how to form real bonds, how to tolerate the discomfort of genuine vulnerability, how to sit with uncertainty. We're losing tolerance for the friction that real connection requires. And as we lose that tolerance, real connection becomes harder. So we retreat further into simulations, which makes us less capable, which makes simulations more appealing. This is the death spiral. There's a phenomenon emergency room doctors started reporting around 2022. Patients with anxiety and depression who, when asked about their social lives, insisted they were very connected. I have thousands of followers. I'm online all the time talking to people. But when probed deeper, close friendships, people to call in crisis, the last conversation that left them feeling understood, the answers revealed profound isolation. These patients weren't lying. They experienced their online interactions as connection, but their bodies responded as if they were in solitary confinement. Elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep, weakened immune response. We've hacked the social reward system, and like all hacks, there are side effects. One is the erosion of mentalization, the ability to accurately imagine what another person thinks and feels. This skill requires practice and feedback. You imagine what someone feels, check with them, adjust your model. On the dead internet, there's no feedback. You imagine what the person on the other end is thinking, but you never find out if you're right. Without feedback, mentalization atrophies, and as it atrophies, we become worse at human connection. I'm watching this happen. People in their 20s who grew up on social media struggle with eye contact, with reading facial expressions, with tolerating silence. Not all of them, but enough that it's a pattern. They don't know why they struggle. They think it's social anxiety, and it is. But the anxiety is downstream of a skill deficit. They never got enough practice reading human faces because they spent their developmental years reading text on screens. This is what the dead internet does. It doesn't just make us lonely, it makes us less capable of alleviating that loneliness. We are becoming ghosts trying to connect with other ghosts and wondering why we feel nothing. The restlessness, the anxiety, the sense that something fundamental is wrong. That's not mental illness. That's a physiologically accurate response to an environment that's activating your social systems without satisfying them. You are not broken. The internet is, and your body has been telling you this for years. The question is, have you been listening? So here we are. The house is empty. The internet is dead. Your body knows it. What do you do with the ruins? You don't mourn the past as if it were retrievable. You don't rage against the machines. You don't fantasize about some revolution that will restore the old internet. It was never sustainable. It was a brief window between technological capability and economic capture, and that window has closed. You also don't embrace the new as inevitable progress. You don't pretend the dead internet is fine or that AI companions are just as good as human connection. That's cope. That's the psyche trying to protect itself from grief by denying the loss. What you do is grieve, properly, completely, and then you figure out how to live in the world that remains. This is not a happy ending. The internet you loved is gone. Most of what you interact with online is already simulation. The trajectory is clear. But here's the thing about trajectories. You don't have to ride them to the end. The dead internet is a macro-level phenomenon, a description of the overall ecosystem, the median experience, the path of least resistance. But you are not required to live at the median. You can live in the ruins deliberately. There's a concept from architecture called ruin value, ruin and vert. The idea that buildings should look beautiful even in decay. The medieval cathedral looks magnificent in ruin. The Roman aqueduct becomes more haunting with age. The dead internet has ruin value. It no longer functions as a space for human connection, but it still contains artifacts of 30 years of human creativity, weirdness, longing. Those artifacts don't disappear just because the space has been colonized. They just become harder to find. This is the first principle. Stop using the internet the way it wants to be used. Stop scrolling the feed. Stop following recommendations. Move through the space like an archaeologist, with purpose, with curiosity, with the understanding that you're looking for remnants. Practically, this means several things. First, reclaim your navigation. Stop using search engines that optimize for engagement. Build your own pathways, RSS feeds, bookmarks, email newsletters from actual humans. Yes, these feel outdated. That's the point. They're outdated because they weren't profitable. Second, cultivate smallness. The internet is dying at scale, but small spaces can persist. Private Discord servers with actual friends, forums with 50 active users who know each other, the cracks where human community still grows. These spaces won't be viral. They won't have reach. That's precisely what makes them valuable. Third, accept illegibility. The internet died because everything became legible to algorithms. So be illegible. Write in ways that confuse sentiment analysis. Create things with no clear monetization path. The algorithm will ignore you. Good. Fourth, use AI like a tool, not a crutch. Don't let it smooth your rough edges. Use it generatively, not correctively. The key is intentionality. The dead internet thrives on autopilot, so claim your agency. Fifth, practice real connection, face to face, voice to voice. With all the inefficiency and risk that entails, your social brain is atrophying from disuse. The only way to rebuild is to use it. This doesn't mean abandoning online connection entirely. It means recognizing what it can and cannot provide. It can provide information, entertainment, occasional glimpses of another consciousness. It cannot provide sustained intimacy or the felt sense of mattering to someone else. For those things, you need bodies. You need presence. Sixth, resist the urge to scale. Reach is what killed the internet. Once something gets big enough to be valuable to advertisers, it gets optimized. Once optimized, it dies. So keep your good things small, accept obscurity. 7th, preserve what matters. The internet is not permanent. Most of what exists online will be gone in 10 years, buried under algorithmic content. Download articles that matter. Archive forums. Keep local copies of the things that make you feel less alone. 8th, teach the next generation. There's a cohort born after 2005 who have never known anything but the dead internet. To them, this is normal. Show them what's possible. Show them the weird old blogs that still exist. Give them tools to recognize presence, to distinguish human from simulation. 9th, make peace with the loss. The internet you loved is gone. The version where you could stumble onto someone's personal website and spend hours reading their random thoughts about Roman architecture or Victorian taxidermy or whatever weird obsession they had, that's over. The version where you could have a conversation in a forum and come back a week later and the same people would still be there, still engaged in the same discussion, that's over. The version where you could feel less alone because someone on the other side of the world had written exactly the feeling you thought was unique to you, that's mostly over, though it still happens in pockets. You have to grieve this, actually grieve it. Sit with the sadness. Feel the anger. Acknowledge that something genuinely valuable has been destroyed in the name of optimization and profit. But don't get stuck there, because grief, when properly processed, leads to acceptance, and acceptance leads to agency. You cannot change the macro-level trajectory, but you can change your own path through the ruins. You can be intentional. You can resist. You can create small spaces where human connection still happens. You can be the weird person who still blogs, still uses RSS, still writes emails that are too long, still values presence over reach. You can be a holdout, a remnant, a living fossil. And maybe that's enough. Because here's the thing about ruins. They're only ruins if you're looking for the original function. If you stop expecting the internet to be what it was, if you stop demanding that it serve the purpose it once served, then it becomes something else. Not better, not worse, just different. A landscape, a resource, a space to be navigated with care and skepticism and occasional moments of unexpected beauty. The dead internet is not coming back to life, but you can live in it without being consumed by it. You can use it without letting it use you. You can find the other humans who are also stumbling through the ruins, looking for something real. It won't be easy. It will require constant vigilance, constant intentionality, constant resistance to the path of least resistance. But the alternative is to become another ghost, another simulation, another pattern in the dataset. And you're more than that. You've always been more than that. The question is, will you act like it? The internet is dead. Long live whatever we build in its place. Even if that place is small, even if it's temporary, even if it's just a group chat with 5 friends who still write in complete sentences, at least it's real. At least it's yours. At least it's human. And in the ruins of the dead internet, that might be the only victory left to claim.